In the quiet fields of Zimbabwe, silver lights glide silently across the night sky. Children and villagers alike watch, hearts still and breaths held, as arcs of light twist and shimmer in ways that feel almost alive. What are these gentle visitors, and why do they return night after night? Some call them UFOs. Others whisper of memory and wonder, but one thing is certain. The sky has begun to speak, and those who watch may hear its softest secrets. Chapter 1. The First Flickers. The night settled over the Zimbabwean plains with a quiet familiarity, the kind that only comes from centuries of stars watching over quiet villages. The air was soft, filled with a gentle rustle of trees and the occasional call of a distant night bird. Somewhere in the distance, a faint breeze carried the scent of dry grass and earth, grounding the world in its natural rhythm. Everything seemed ordinary, almost comforting, until a flicker of light rippled across the sky, subtle and strange, like a shy heartbeat against the dark canvas above. It began small, tiny, dancing lights that shimmered briefly before fading into the darkness. At first, the villagers barely noticed. Perhaps it was a plane, a passing satellite, or the reflection of a distant lamp, they thought. But then the lights appeared again, moving with a curious intent, darting gently across the horizon, pausing as if observing, and then drifting in ways that no ordinary object should. A young boy in a small house in Harare's outskirts pressed his forehead to the window, eyes wide, mesmerized by the delicate arcs above. His fingers trembled slightly, not with fear but with wonder, as if the lights were speaking in a language he almost understood but couldn't yet name. By the second night, whispers had begun to ripple quietly through small communities. People spoke softly to one another, lowering their voices as if the lights themselves could hear. "Did you see it?" asked a mother, brushing her son's hair back from his forehead. "I thought it was just the stars moving strangely," he replied, eyes still following the faint glimmers that lingered in memory. The descriptions varied. Some saw flickering orbs, some tiny triangles, and a few reported long, stretching beams of faint light, drifting almost lazily over the horizon. No sound accompanied them. No wind seemed to change their course. They existed quietly, calmly, as if they belonged somewhere else entirely. Even in the small, dusty villages far from city lights, residents began noticing the pattern. Old men sitting on porches with cups of tea leaned forward in silent attention, squinting at the horizon where silver arcs of light played softly against the dark sky. They murmured among themselves, recalling stories from long ago, tales of spirits and wandering lights, of objects in the sky that moved with will, not gravity. Some dismissed it as imagination, but even the skeptics felt a subtle thrill, an unspoken curiosity that something just beyond understanding was quietly passing through their world. The first social media whispers began innocently enough. A local teacher, staying late to grade papers by lamplight, posted a short video on X of a faint, flickering light drifting over her village. The clip was only a few seconds long, blurred, almost unrecognizable, yet it carried a gentle resonance that drew attention. Comments appeared slowly at first. "What is that? Maybe a drone? Or just a shooting star?" The conversation was quiet, exploratory, never panicked. People shared their own sightings, some barely longer than whispers in the wind, and slowly a mosaic of observations began to form. Among those who noticed the first flickers was Tanash, a young man who had grown up hearing the old stories of Rua. He often walked the edges of fields late at night, fascinated by patterns of stars and the way the wind moved over grass. That night, as he walked beneath a sky littered with faintly glowing arcs, he felt a subtle shiver of anticipation, a feeling that something unspoken was gently unfolding. He stopped mid-step, head tilted upward, noticing the movements of the light first erratic, then deliberate, as if someone or something were performing a quiet ritual just beyond comprehension. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then decided against filming. Some experiences, he realized, belonged to the mind and memory first, not to pixels or screens. The pattern began to repeat over the following days. Flickers appeared in the same regions of the sky at roughly the same times, a rhythm emerging that no one could yet articulate. A farmer tending his crops late into the evening paused, noticing a series of faint, silver arcs dancing above his fields. He rubbed his eyes, convinced that fatigue or imagination was playing tricks. Yet the lights remained, moving with deliberate elegance, hovering for moments before drifting slowly westward. In quiet corners, people began asking themselves the same question, whispered in hushed tones. Are we seeing the same thing? Or are our minds weaving the story together? It was not fear that people felt, but a subtle, persistent curiosity. Children sat on porches, pointing skyward with gentle excitement, their parents joining them quietly, sharing stories of what they remembered from years past the 1994 aerial school incident, when silver discs had appeared in Rua. Even though decades had passed, a faint echo of memories seemed to hum softly in the air, giving shape to the new sightings. The villagers spoke of the lights as if they were visitors, cautious and deliberate, waiting for someone to notice, and perhaps to understand. Observers began noticing peculiar details. Some of the lights appeared to split into smaller arcs, like droplets of silver mist suspended in the air, then recombined seamlessly. Others seemed to move in patterns that mimicked human intention, hovering, retreating, circling, and occasionally pausing in deliberate stillness. There was a calmness in their motion, a sense that the phenomenon was patient, not hurried, as if inviting the watchers to notice without demanding comprehension. People described a gentle pull, a fascination they could not fully explain, a desire to remain outside long after night had settled. Even the night itself seemed to respond. Clouds drifted lazily across the sky, soft winds moved through the tall grasses, and the faint glow of distant villages added a warm counterpoint to the ethereal silver arcs. Ocasionally, the lights would reflect off windows, puddles, or even the tips of trees, creating fleeting patterns that resembled delicate sketches in motion. The observers often paused in silence, allowing the moments to linger, aware that these glimpses were transient and subtle, yet profoundly affecting. By the third week of sightings, a sense of community had quietly formed among those who observed. Even strangers would nod knowingly at one another in the streets or on porches, a shared acknowledgement of something unspoken and mysterious. Small WhatsApp groups were created to track the appearances, sketching patterns of motion, noting times, and describing shapes. Some participants argued, some doubted, but all engaged in a slow, careful observation that reflected the patience of the phenomenon itself. No one wanted to claim authority. Everyone simply wanted to witness. Interestingly, the sightings drew attention not only to the sky but to the subtle emotional states they evoked. Witnesses spoke of gentle awe, contemplative stillness, and a kind of happiness that was quiet and introspective. Unlike the sudden terror often associated with unexplained events, the Zimbabwe sightings felt like a soft invitation to awareness, to notice the ordinary in extraordinary ways. A grandmother recalled how, as a child, she had once believed in wandering spirit, and she felt a curious nostalgia in the flickering arcs, a bridge between generations and stories. Even scientists and hobbyists began contributing. Amateur astronomers documented times and approximate positions, comparing them to satellites, drones, and other explainable objects. Yet even when rational explanations were considered, the subtle nature of the movements, the timing, and the consistency remained elusive. Something intangible lingered, a gentle rhythm or presence that could not be measured fully by instruments. The phenomenon was real in its effect, not necessarily in physical evidence alone. By the end of the first month, the first flickers had become a quiet legend among those who observed. Families would gather outside in the evenings, children pointing skyward with fingers illuminated by lamplight, parents smiling as they whispered tales of the silver arcs. Conversations drifted into gentle reflection about what these lights might mean, their origin, and their intent. Were they warnings, messages, invitations, or simply phenomena, awaiting comprehension? The uncertainty itself was the gift, a soft thread connecting hearts and minds across space and memory. And still, the lights continued, subtle, patient, and deliberate. Every observer carried the memory differently. Some drew sketches, others wrote notes, while a few simply closed their eyes and remembered the motion, the hum, the sense of quiet attention in the air. In every case, the first flickers had begun a slow awakening, a gentle call to curiosity, a reminder that the world holds more than what is easily seen. For the night in Zimbabwe, the world had shifted. The stars moved above as usual, but beneath them, humans were noticing differently. The ordinary became extraordinary. The mundane shimmered, and attention itself became a quiet form of connection. And in this subtle space, the whispers of the 2024 to 2025 sightings had begun a calm, mysterious arc that would guide observers through nights filled with wonder, reflection, and gentle, unfolding stories yet to come. The first flickers had arrived, and with them a quiet question hung in the air. What else might reveal itself, if only we watch patiently? And so the nights in Zimbabwe stretched quietly, waiting for the next hint of silver to dance across the sky. Chapter 2. Ripples through the community. As the first flickers continued to dance in the skies above Zimbabwe, their quiet presence began to ripple softly through the villages and towns. The glow of the lights had already captured the attention of a few observant souls, but now their subtle influence was extending further. Like gentle waves on a calm lake, conversations began to thread through communities. Hushed and careful, almost reverent, people spoke in low tones, as if raising their voices might shatter the delicate rhythm of the phenomenon above. In a small village just beyond the outskirts of Harare, the whisper started with the elders. They'd always been attuned to patterns, to the movements of the earth and the sky, and now they were noticing something they could not immediately explain. The flickers were quiet, but persistent, appearing in arcs and lines that seemed too deliberate to be accidental. A few older women, sitting on benches outside their homes, pointed toward the horizon, exchanging glances that spoke of old memories, long-forgotten tales of wandering lights, and the spirits of ancestors. Their hands moved gently through the air as if tracing the paths of these luminous visitors, their gestures slow, deliberate, and almost ritualistic. In nearby homes, families began to notice subtle changes in their evenings. Children pressed their faces to windows, waiting, watching, pointing silently. The adults, initially skeptical, found themselves pausing in the quiet moments between chores, gazing upward, feeling a strange pull toward the soft glow above. Conversations shifted from the ordinary matters of daily life to something softer, more reflective. Did you see it tonight? It's smaller, but brighter than last time. It moved differently, almost like it was aware of us. Words were chosen carefully, with respect, as if the lights themselves deserved a soft acknowledgement. Meanwhile, in small-town cafes and shops, the rumors began to spread. People exchanged stories cautiously, leaning close over cups of tea, sharing what they had witnessed. Even those who had not yet seen the lights found themselves captivated by the tales, imagining the arcs of silver and gold tracing gentle paths across the sky. Everyone spoke of the subtle pattern forming. The lights appeared at roughly the same times each night, moving with a rhythm that was hard to define, almost musical in its quietness. The idea that these flickers might be returning again and again sparked a tender sense of anticipation and curiosity. A school teacher in Harare noticed how the topic began to weave its way into classrooms, not as fear or gossip, but as fascination. Children drew sketches of the lights, tracing arcs with pencils, imagining their shapes and colors. Some saw simple orbs, some faint triangles, others intricate lattice of light that seemed to move with intention. The teacher allowed them to share their work softly, whispering suggestions that this was a story of wonder, not danger. Through these sketches and gentle discussions, a sense of collective awareness began to grow, as if the lights were quietly inviting the children to participate in their unfolding mystery. As the whispers traveled, they encountered the varied perspectives of adults. Some, practical and grounded, suggested logical explanations. Drones, distant lanterns, atmospheric reflections, satellites, tracing invisible paths. Others recalled older tales, stories of wandering lights, spirits, or celestial signs that had always appeared in times of change or reflection. The interplay of logic and legend created a delicate tension, soft and contemplative rather than frightening. People found themselves wondering not about fear, but about the unknown, about patterns in the world that quietly beckoned them to notice more deeply. Amidst this gentle hum of curiosity, the first attempts to document the lights emerged. A young man, Tinesh, remembered from the first flickers, carried a small camera into the fields behind his home. Each evening, he would position himself on a slight rise of earth, gaze upward, and wait patiently. At times, the light seemed to appear just for him, moving with soft intention, pausing as if aware of the observer's presence. The footage he captured was brief and faint, almost imperceptible, but it carried an undeniable sense of elegance. Arcs of silver light moving in harmony with one another, gliding over treetops and fields before fading into the night. By the second week, small communities had begun to form informal observation groups. Neighbors would gather quietly at dusk, bring in blankets, mugs of tea, and patience. They whispered among themselves, exchanging notes, comparing sketches, and marveling at the subtle differences in movement. Some nights, the lights seemed closer, hovering just beyond the trees, while on others they appeared distant, almost ethereal, like echoes of memory cast into the sky. Each appearance invited a gentle contemplation, a soft attention that lingered long after the lights had vanished. At the same time, social media began to play its quiet role. Short clips, photos, and vague sketches circulated, gaining attention gradually. The posts were understated, no sensational headlines, no panic, just curiosity and wonder. Observers commented cautiously, often leaving only minimal words. I saw it too. It moved differently tonight. Something gentle is here. The low volume of engagement created a sense of intimacy, a shared secret between those who had noticed and those who were beginning to pay attention. Even without certainty, the whispers formed a subtle network of awareness. Local journalists, too, started to take note, though their reports were careful and measured. One correspondent described sitting quietly on a veranda with villagers, waiting for the lights, and feeling a calm anticipation rise and fall with each flicker. It was as if the night itself was alive, he wrote later. The lights did not demand attention. They invited it, and in that invitation, a quiet sense of connection spread among all who watched. His words circulated slowly, reinforcing the soft, reflective tone of the community's experience. Interestingly, the lights also prompted private reflection. Elderly men and women remembered times when the sky had seemed to shimmer for reasons they could not explain, odd patterns of light, celestial phenomena, or stories passed down through generations. The younger observers, guided by modern tools and curiosity, began to see these events as part of a continuum, the past gently whispering to the present. Children, too, were influenced by these stories, often blending imagination with observation in a way that was innocent, creative, and surprisingly insightful. Through it all, there was a delicate balance between skepticism and wonder. People often questioned themselves. Am I seeing this clearly, or am I imagining it? Yet the consistency of multiple witnesses, even across distances, reinforced a quiet belief in the phenomenon's reality, without ever needing to assert it loudly. No one claimed authority. No one sought to conquer the mystery. Instead, the community collectively held space for attention, observation, and gentle curiosity, letting the experience unfold at its own pace. Even the simplest moments became infused with meaning. A mother might pause on her porch while washing dishes, noticing a faint arc of light tracing the horizon. A young boy could whisper to his sister, "Look, it moved again." A farmer, leaning against a fence after a long day, might tilt his head and smile, feeling the subtle presence of something beyond routine life. There was no urgency, no drama, only a calm, shared awareness that something unusual, delicate, and almost musical in its motion was threading quietly through their nights. The second week also brought attention to subtle patterns. Observers noticed the lights often traveled in similar directions, appeared at roughly consistent times, and occasionally paused as if to allow a closer gaze. Some lights moved in tandem, almost like a slow dance, while others lingered alone, gentle and solitary. The effect was hypnotic in a way that invited reflection, not panic. People began keeping journals, sketching movements, and noting times and locations, not to prove anything, but to participate in the unfolding story. And as the ripples through the community continued, something else emerged. A soft, collective imagination. Stories began to intertwine, blending sight with memory and legend. Some compared the lights to long-forgotten tales of ancestral spirits or wandering guides. Others imagined gentle beings observing from above. These interpretations were tentative, whispered in conversation, never imposed. The emphasis remained on observation, patience, and the quiet joy of noticing, allowing curiosity to flourish alongside contemplation. By the end of the month, the first flickers had become more than fleeting lights in the sky. They were quiet companions in the nightly rhythm of Zimbabwean life, threads weaving together memory, imagination, and observation. Everyone who had witnessed them carried a subtle sense of participation, a connection to the pattern of existence that was greater than any single observer. Even those who had not yet seen the lights felt anticipation, a soft desire to witness what the night held. And so the ripples continued, spreading gently through communities, towns, and online whispers. Each observer, each sketch, each quiet conversation added a layer to the unfolding mosaic of experience. The phenomenon remained elusive, never forcing itself into view, but always present in the spaces between expectation and awareness. Nights became opportunities for contemplation, for soft curiosity, for watching the sky without judgment, for listening to the whispers that passed quietly from one mind to another. And somewhere, in the distance, the lights waited patiently, their motions deliberate, their presence subtle, carrying a gentle invitation to those willing to notice. The whispers spread slowly, gathering quietly across the land, hinting that the sky held more than anyone had yet imagined. Chapter 3. Patterns in the Sky. Night after night, the silver flickers above Zimbabwe began to reveal a rhythm, subtle yet unmistakable, like a slow heartbeat in the dark. Observers noticed that these lights no longer appeared as random sparks against the night. They moved with intention, drawing gentle arcs across the horizon, pausing in stillness, as if acknowledging the eyes watching below. There was a strange familiarity in their movements, a deliberate cadence that invited attention without demanding it, as though the sky itself were whispering, calling for observation and reflection. In one quiet village, an elderly man named Tendai often took his evening walks along the soft, uneven paths between fields. He remembered the first stories of wandering lights from his own youth, tales his grandmother had whispered about spirits that guided or warned, flickering far above the earth. Now, decades later, he found himself pausing more frequently, watching as small clusters of silver arcs drifted across the sky. Sometimes a single light would linger, hovering near the horizon as if inspecting him, before gliding slowly upward to join others in the distance. Tendai's fingers trembled slightly as he lifted a sketchpad from his pocket. Tracing the movements, he saw soft lines that mirrored the motion of the lights. His pencil hovered and danced over the page, capturing not shapes alone, but a sense of motion, a feeling of intentionality he could not put into words. Meanwhile, in the small town of Rua, a group of children and teenagers gathered quietly in a field just beyond the edge of the village. Blankets spread beneath them, thermoses of tea and warm cocoa at their side. They whispered softly among themselves. Each had witnessed the flickers in their own way, some seeing tiny triangles, others arcs that split and rejoined. Yet all sensed a shared story unfolding above. The eldest among them, a boy named Kuda, pointed to a faint glow hovering over a distant copse of trees. "Do you see how it pauses there?" he asked, voice hushed. "It's almost like it knows we're watching." The others nodded, eyes wide, holding back words that might break the quiet spell. The pattern grew more intricate with each passing night. Observers began to notice that the lights sometimes moved in tandem, traveling in small formations, shifting direction with a gentle grace. On other occasions, a single light would drift slowly, almost lazily, across the dark expanse of the sky, illuminating clouds with a soft reflection before disappearing behind them. Those who followed these movements closely began keeping careful notes, times, angles, approximate distances. Even without measuring instruments, there was a sense of regularity, a rhythm that hinted at intelligence or intention, but never aggressively, only in gentle suggestion. Across the villages, quiet communities began to notice the same movements independently. In Harari's outskirts, a woman named Chipo sat on her veranda with her children, tea steaming gently in their hands. As a silver arc glided across the horizon, she tilted her head, noticing the way the light shimmered against the clouds, lingering just above the treetops before slowly ascending. She whispered to her children, "It's like it's painting the sky for us, little by little." Her children leaned closer, eyes wide and reflecting the soft glow, drawing lines in the dirt below them to mirror the paths they saw above. Across miles of distance, others describe similar arcs, creating a tapestry of observation stitched together not by science, but by attention and wonder. Some nights, the lights seemed to engage in subtle displays of movement that defied ordinary explanation. A trio of silver arcs, for instance, would drift in unison, then separate briefly before rejoining in perfect harmony, creating the illusion of a slow, celestial dance. Observers often described a sense of anticipation during these moments, holding their breath as the arcs moved, feeling a delicate tension that was neither frightening nor anxious, only curious and deeply engaging. The effect was hypnotic eyes, following patterns, minds tracing motion, hearts beating softly in quiet synchrony with the rhythm above. Even the animals seemed to sense the change. Dogs paused mid-step, ears twitching toward the sky. Cattle lifted their heads, nostrils flaring as if catching a subtle vibration. Birds occasionally rose from the trees, circling the silver arcs briefly before settling back to roost. There was no panic, no disturbance, only a shared awareness, a subtle acknowledgement that the nights held something different, something worthy of attention. Humans, too, felt this, a quiet sensation that threaded through their minds and hearts, inviting them to watch without expectation. Observers began to experiment with soft recordings. Cameras captured faint movements, but never fully reproduced the subtlety and grace seen with the naked eye. Mobile devices, videos, and photographs revealed only vague, fleeting streaks of light, yet even these crude representations carried a hypnotic quality. Each observer knew, instinctively, that the phenomenon could not be fully captured. Its essence lay in the act of watching itself. And in that watching, each person experienced a private conversation with the night, a dialogue that blended perception, memory, and imagination. Patterns also revealed themselves in timing. Flickers often appeared at specific hours, usually after twilight had deepened, lingering until the early hours of the morning. Some lights were punctual, appearing at almost the same minute each night, as though following a schedule imperceptible to human senses. Others were spontaneous, arriving without warning, drifting silently across the sky before vanishing into darkness. Observers began to anticipate their arrival, feeling a gentle pull toward the fields, porches and hills from which they could watch best. Patience became a shared practice, a soft ritual of attention and quiet awareness. As the nights progressed, more observers began documenting not just motion, but subtle variations in color and intensity. Some arcs glimmered silver-white, others hinted at pale gold or faintly greenish hues. A few appeared to pulse, gently, brightening and dimming with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. These subtle differences sparked gentle speculation among witnesses. Could the variations carry meaning? Were they signals, or simply natural variations in the phenomenon? No one demanded answers. Instead, observers let their curiosity unfold slowly, savoring the subtle questions as much as the lights themselves. The shared experience became a quiet network of attention. Families, friends, and neighbors exchanged notes, sketches, and observations, sometimes in person, sometimes over messages or social media posts. Even skeptics joined in the gentle ritual of observation, their questions framed carefully. Is it something in the atmosphere? Could it be a drone? No one needed certainty. The emphasis was on engagement, on witnessing together, on holding space for mystery without insisting on explanation. The calmness of the gatherings mirrored the movement above, deliberate, measured, and patient. At the same time, memories of the past began to weave into the present. Older observers softly recalled the 1994 aerial school sightings, recognizing echoes of those silver discs in the current lights. Conversations drifted toward family stories, folklore, and lessons from ancestors, soft threads of continuity that tied generations together. Children, hearing these accounts, combined observation with imagination, creating gentle sketches and quiet stories that blended wonder and attention. The phenomenon became less about the lights alone and more about the experience of noticing, a feeling connected to something larger than daily life. The rhythm of the pattern inspired reflection. People pondered the subtle ways in which observation could change perception, the way attention could shape meaning without asserting authority. Nights became exercises in calm curiosity, in patience, In the quiet joy of noticing, observers describe sensations of gentle anticipation, a soft hum of presence in the air, as if the lights themselves were aware of their watchers. No one felt frightened. Instead, there was a collective acknowledgement that the ordinary world could hold extraordinary moments, fleeting and delicate, if only one chose to pay attention. By the end of the third week, patterns were becoming clearer. Certain arcs appeared more often, hovering above the same fields and hills. Others traced paths that echoed one another, forming subtle shapes in the night sky. Observers began to feel a gentle anticipation as they waited for the familiar movements, a quiet sense of connection that spanned distance and circumstance. The lights, still mysterious, had begun to feel almost like companions, their presence threading softly through memory and imagination. And yet, even as patterns emerged, questions remained. What were the flickers? Where did they come from? Did they have intention? Or were they simply phenomena waiting for human attention? These questions were not urgent. They were gentle nudges, whispers to the mind that invited reflection. Observers learned to sit with the unknown, to hold curiosity without needing answers. And in doing so, they discovered the true gift of the lights, the ability to notice, to connect, and to wonder together. The nights in Zimbabwe had transformed. Where once darkness had been simply the absence of sun, it now held rhythm, purpose, and presence. Silver arcs traced stories in the sky, inviting those below to follow, to notice, to imagine. And in every soft movement, every pause and glide, there was a calm invitation to watch, to reflect, and to let curiosity bloom like a slow, gentle flower under the quiet night sky. And as the patterns continued, whispers of recognition spread, linking observers across villages and generations in shared, silent wonder. Chapter 4. The Watchers Awake. The nights grew longer as October settled over Zimbabwe, and with the lengthening hours of darkness, the watchers found themselves drawn more and more to the fields, porches, and hillsides that offered the clearest view of the sky. The silver arcs that had first appeared weeks ago now moved with a quiet familiarity, tracing gentle patterns that beckoned observation. Each night, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, the community paused in anticipation, as if waiting for a long-expected visitor to arrive. For some, the calling to watch became almost instinctive. A teacher named Chidza found herself lingering on her veranda long after her family had gone inside. The warm scent of tea mixed with the cool evening air as she leaned on the railing, her eyes tracing a flicker that moved just above the horizon. It was subtle at first, a tiny pulse of silver, but it drifted and paused with an elegance that invited her attention. Chidza breathed slowly, noticing how her heartbeat seemed to align with the rhythm of the lights. She did not feel fear, only a gentle curiosity, a sense that something beyond ordinary life had quietly arrived in the night. In the fields outside smaller villages, children gathered, blankets spread on the grass, their whispered conversations soft as the evening wind. They pointed skyward, sometimes nudging one another to watch carefully as a single arc hovered, then moved gracefully across the dark expanse. A boy named Tafajwa traced its path in the dirt with a stick, forming patterns that mimicked the light above. He did not speak much, but his eyes shone with quiet fascination. Around him, the other children watched and copied his movements, creating a communal rhythm of observation, a silent choreography that mirrored the arcs in the sky. Across town, in the quiet corners of Rua, families began to notice subtle emotional shifts. The calm focus required to watch the light seemed to soften tensions, slow hurried thoughts, and open space for reflection. Parents and children alike discovered that the act of watching, of noticing the delicate movements above, carried its own quiet reward. In kitchens and living rooms, conversations drifted toward memory, imagination, and gentle speculation. People shared stories of what they had seen, not to prove anything, but to extend the shared experience. There was a growing sense that the lights in their deliberate arcs were drawing attention to the subtle layers of life that often went unnoticed. The sway of a tree, the shimmer of a river, the glimmer of stars long hidden by city light. It was not only human observers who seemed to sense something unusual. Animals, too, responded to the presence of the lights. Dogs paused mid-step, ears alert, gazing at the horizon with still bodies. Cattle lifted heads slowly, nostrils flaring, as if aware of a delicate energy in the air. Birds circled and returned to roost, their movements synchronized with the arcs above. The natural world seemed to hum in quiet resonance with the lights, reinforcing the sense that these were not merely random phenomena, but elements of a broader rhythm, an unseen order that connected sky, land, and life. Among the watchers, a gentle sense of purpose began to emerge. Small groups started keeping journals, noting times, angles, durations, and subtle variations in brightness and color. Some lights shimmered silver, others faintly gold or green, and occasionally a light would split into smaller arcs, only to reunite in perfect symmetry. Observers did not rush to analyze or explain. They recorded simply to honor the phenomenon's delicate beauty. Each entry, each sketch, was a meditation, a form of attentive presence that slowly deepened their connection to the unfolding mystery. Stories began to drift across the countryside, softly spoken and shared over tea or around fires. An old woman recounted how, decades ago, her grandmother had described similar wandering lights, said to appear at times of reflection or change. A young boy recalled his father speaking of silver arcs that glimmered over the hills when he was a child, now bringing an uncanny echo into the present. These recollections created a quiet bridge between generations, tying contemporary sightings to the subtle histories of memory and folklore. It was as if the lights had arrived not merely in the present, but through time itself, weaving together past and present into a delicate, luminous thread. In some homes, the lights inspired gentle creativity. Children sketched them in notebooks, painting arcs and circles, experimenting with soft watercolors that mirrored the ethereal glow. Adults wrote quietly, recording impressions, sensations, and fleeting thoughts stirred by watching the patterns unfold. Music drifted softly from windows, improvised melodies meant to harmonize with the arcs above. In all cases, the act of observation became a gentle form of participation, a ritual of attention, a way to honor the presence of something quietly extraordinary. Even scientists and hobbyists joined the quiet vigil. Amateur astronomers, curious but careful, documented times, trajectories, and approximate positions. They compared observations with known satellites, drones, and celestial objects. Yet even the most rigorous analyses could not fully explain the subtle patterns, the deliberate pauses, or the occasional splitting and recombining of arcs. The phenomenon resisted reduction to measurement alone. It existed as both visual and emotional experience, tangible yet elusive, precise yet fleeting. The watchers began to notice other subtleties as well. Occasionally, the arcs would linger over certain areas. A copse of trees, a small clearing, a cantilus slope before moving on. Some appeared to respond to human attention, pausing as eyes followed, then drifting slowly away. Observers described a sense of acknowledgement, a quiet interaction that required no words. The feeling was neither commanding nor intrusive. It was invitational, almost like a soft acknowledgement of shared presence. As the nights passed, small patterns of connection emerged among observers. People who had never met exchanged notes, sketches, and whispers of experience. Conversations on social media remained understated, careful, reflective, never sensational. Comments were tentative. "I saw it tonight. It moved differently. It paused near the hills." The gentle hum of curiosity linked strangers together in a soft network of attention, a shared meditation on the subtle arcs of light that had quietly become part of their nights. One evening, as the sky deepened into its richest indigo, a young girl named Anna Sue sat on a hill with her father, her legs tucked beneath her, notebook in hand. She watched a trio of silver arcs drift slowly across the horizon, their movement deliberate, almost choreographed. Her father leaned close, whispering gently, "Do you see how it hesitates there? It's almost like it's inviting us to notice." Anesu nodded, tracing the paths in her notebook, feeling an unusual clarity settle in her mind. The arcs above seemed alive with quiet intention, patient and gentle, guiding attention rather than demanding it. In that moment, she felt part of something larger, an invisible rhythm connecting sky, land, and observer. Meanwhile, researchers from nearby towns began compiling maps of sightings, noting the times and directions of arcs, the subtle variations in color, and the sequence of movements. They shared data cautiously, emphasizing observation over explanation. There was a growing recognition that the phenomenon might not be a single event, but a continuing presence, a quiet influence threading through time, attention, and imagination. Observers began to feel that their patience and focus were being rewarded, that the more carefully they watched, the more intricate the patterns became. By the end of the month, the watchers were no longer merely witnesses. They had become participants in a slow, collective awakening. Nights in Zimbabwe were defined by patient observation, quiet conversation, and gentle reflection. Communities, connected by shared attention, discovered new ways to engage with one another and the world around them. Children learned patience. Parents found new appreciation for small wonders, and even the natural environment seemed to align with this subtle rhythm. And though no answers had been found, no conclusions reached, there was a profound shift in awareness. Every arc, every pause, every gentle flicker of silver light carried with it a quiet lesson. That attention itself is a form of connection, that curiosity nurtures understanding, and that some mysteries are best held gently, experienced fully, without forcing resolution. The watchers had awakened, and in their gentle vigil they had begun to understand that the silver arcs above were not just lights in the sky but invitations, delicate, patient, and persistent, to notice, reflect, and connect with the world and each other, in ways that extended beyond sight alone. And as the watchers deepened their quiet vigil, the arcs above began to reveal subtler, more mysterious movements, hinting at a story yet to unfold. Chapter 5. Silent Visitors. The nights carried a deeper hush now, a quiet that seemed to settle over the villages, the fields, and the distant hills. The silver arcs that had appeared weeks before had transformed from fleeting curiosities into persistent companions, weaving through the darkness with a grace that invited quiet attention. Each observer, whether perched on a veranda, lying on a blanket in the grass, or standing alone in a field, began to sense the presence of something deliberate, something that moved not by accident, but with purpose. For many, the first hints of understanding came not from the shape or the glow of the arcs, but from the way they interacted with the world below. Tendai, the elderly man who had been sketching patterns for weeks, noticed that the lights often hovered over familiar landmarks. A copse of trees, the bend of a river, a small hilltop. They would pause briefly, glimmering faintly, before moving onward, almost as if acknowledging the earth beneath them. Tendai found himself leaning closer, squinting, feeling a subtle connection he could neither name nor fully comprehend. He sketched with patience, each line a reflection of attention, a way to engage with the silent visitors, without intrusion. Children, too, were captivated. A small group in the outskirts of Harare had developed their own gentle ritual. They would gather at dusk, sit quietly in a circle, and wait for the lights to appear. No one spoke at first. Their soft whispers came only after the arcs moved above. They described shapes, trails, pauses, and glows, learning to notice subtleties that might have escaped an adult's eye. In these moments, observation became a shared language, a quiet communion that needed no explanation. The arcs, in turn, seemed to respond in kind, drifting in patterns that were both intricate and harmonious, teasing curiosity without ever demanding it. Across the villages, families noticed subtle shifts in daily rhythms. Evening chores and casual conversations began to be punctuated by brief pauses, glances upward, and soft exclamations of wonder. Parents who'd once dismissed the phenomenon now found themselves lingering near windows, mugs of tea held loosely in hand, feeling the same gentle anticipation as their children. Even those who had seen nothing felt the pull, a quiet insistence that demanded reflection, attention, and patience. The silence of the nights became a shared teacher. Observers noticed how easy it was to become lost in thought while tracking the ark's movements, how subtle patterns emerged only when attention was given freely, without expectation. One evening, a teacher named Chidza sat with her notebook open, recording the ark's trajectory. She noticed the lights pausing over a hilltop, then splitting into 3 separate arcs, each moving with synchronized precision before emerging once again. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote, not from fear, but from the realization that she was witnessing something beyond ordinary perception, something deliberate in its quiet beauty. Even animals seemed to acknowledge the presence of the silent visitors. Dogs would sit still, ears perked, following the arcs with unblinking attention. Cattle lifted their heads, nostrils flaring softly, as if sensing a delicate energy in the air. Birds, returning to roost, occasionally flitted near the lights, circling briefly before settling once more. There was no panic, no disturbance, only a subtle resonance, a quiet harmony between the natural world and the phenomenon above. The silent visitors also sparked subtle creativity among watchers. Sketches became more detailed, capturing not only the arcs themselves but the trails, pauses, and interactions they traced across the sky. Children began experimenting with colors, blending soft silvers, golds, and greens to reflect what they observed. Adults, too, wrote quietly, noting impressions, emotions, and fleeting thoughts. Inspired by the arcs, music drifted softly from open windows, improvised melodies mirroring the arcs. Slow dance. Observation became a gentle ritual, a form of meditation, and a celebration of attention. A small group of amateur astronomers began to track the arcs with rudimentary instruments, measuring angles, durations, and apparent speeds. Their logs were meticulous, yet even they admitted the impossibility of fully capturing the arc's essence. Photographs and video recordings revealed faint streaks of light, but lacked the subtle grace and intentionality seen with the naked eye. The phenomenon existed both as observable reality and as personal experience, tangible, yet ephemeral, precise, yet ungraspable. Patterns began to reveal themselves more clearly. Certain arcs appeared at nearly the same times each night, while others moved unpredictably, drifting silently across vast stretches of sky. Occasionally, arcs seemed to converge, pause over familiar landmarks, and then diverge once more. Observers began noticing the arc's subtle responses to human attention. When watchers lingered, the arcs seemed to hover longer. When curiosity waned, they drifted away. There was no force, no manipulation, only an invitation to engage gently, patiently, and with awareness. Whispers of these observations began to circulate among communities, shared softly in conversation, sketches, and notes. Social media posts were understated, measured, and reflective, emphasizing observation over conclusion. Did anyone else notice the arc pause over the old mango tree? One post asked. It glimmered brighter than usual tonight, said another. The quiet exchange created a network of awareness, linking watchers who had never met, united by patience, attention, and subtle wonder. The silent visitors also stirred reflection on memory and history. Elders recalled stories of wandering lights seen decades ago, tales of spirits, guides, or celestial messengers. Children, guided by imagination and observation, began blending legend with reality, producing sketches and soft stories that captured the arc's gentle movements, their pauses, and their grace. Observers began to sense a connection not only across space but across time, a quiet thread tying past, present, and imagination together. Even with all this observation, questions persisted. What were these lights? Where did they originate? Did they have awareness or intention? Observers did not rush to answer. Instead, they allowed curiosity to settle softly, letting the questions linger like gentle ripples across a still pond. In the absence of certainty, a deeper understanding emerged. The act of watching itself was meaningful, a quiet engagement with the world, a patient meditation that brought attention and wonder into everyday life. The phenomenon began influencing subtle shifts in daily routines. People rose earlier to catch the arcs at dusk, lingered longer at nightfall, and found themselves noticing ordinary details. The sway of trees, the hum of evening insects, the shimmer of water in moonlight that often went unnoticed. Observation became a form of quiet mindfulness, a shared practice that connected individual awareness with the broader rhythms of the night. By mid-month, the arcs had become a nightly companion, threading silently through the lives of those who paid attention. Nights in Zimbabwe were now punctuated by deliberate pauses, soft exclamations of recognition, and the gentle thrill of curiosity. Families, children, neighbors, and distant observers participated in a collective experience, unified not by certainty, but by attention, patience, and the shared act of noticing. And yet, the silent visitors maintained their mystery. No words accompanied their movements. No sudden displays of power or alarm disrupted the calm. Their presence was gentle, deliberate, and patient, encouraging quiet observation rather than demanding attention. Each pause, Each graceful arc, each subtle shift in brightness felt like a soft invitation to watch, to reflect, and to connect with the unfolding story without force or expectation. As the nights deepened, observers began to notice a subtle emotional resonance. Watching the arcs encouraged a reflection on one's own life, moments of calm, curiosity, and attentiveness. People realized that the arcs, in their quiet persistence, were teaching more than observation alone. They were teaching presence, mindfulness, and the beauty of attention. Every observer, in turn, became part of a gentle dialogue between sky and earth, between light and human awareness. And so, the silent visitors continued their gentle arcs across the night sky, their presence threading softly through fields, villages, and distant hills. Each observer in turn discovered that watching, truly watching, was a form of communion. Patience, attention, and curiosity became gifts, and in the soft glow of the arcs, the nights of Zimbabwe held something extraordinary. A quiet story unfolding gently, patiently, and beautifully. And as the arcs glided silently above, their movements began to hint at a deeper presence, drawing watchers toward a truth they could almost sense, yet had not yet fully seen. Chapter 6. Messages in the Night. The nights had grown familiar, yet they carried a gentle suspense, as though each evening held the promise of discovery. The silver arcs above Zimbabwe had become more than lights. They were companions in stillness, teachers in patience, and subtle guides toward something unseen. Observers began to sense nuances in the movements, slight hesitations, delicate changes in trajectory, variations in glow that suggested a rhythm or pattern, a language without words, waiting to be understood. In the quiet outskirts of Rua, a group of teenagers gathered on a gently sloping hill. Blankets were spread across the grass, and mugs of steaming tea rested nearby. Among them, Toriro adjusted her scarf and tilted her head to follow the faint shimmer above. "It's different tonight," she murmured. "Do you see how the arc pauses? Almost as if it's listening." Her friends nodded, leaning forward, eyes reflecting the soft silver glow. Each movement above seemed intentional, deliberate, yet gentle, inviting attention without pressing for understanding. Elderly watchers, too, noticed subtleties that the young could not yet name. Tendai, who had spent countless nights sketching the arcs, began observing variations in timing. Some arcs appeared in familiar sequences, like soft punctuation in the night, while others moved unpredictably, forming shapes or gestures that hinted at deliberate communication. Tendai traced each path carefully on his pad, noting how arcs would split and reunite, hover and glide, shimmer and fade. He did not attempt to explain. He simply observed, listening with his eyes and with a quiet part of his mind that seemed to recognize meaning without the need for language. Across the countryside, families noticed that the arcs sometimes appeared over landmarks tied to personal memories. A lone arc hovered briefly above an old schoolhouse, then glided toward the river, pausing near reeds where children had played decades ago. Another hovered above a grove of mango trees, flickering in a gentle pulse as if marking the rhythm of life beneath. Observers began to feel a soft connection to these patterns, sensing that the arcs were acknowledging not just physical locations, but the stories and memories embedded in the land. Children became more attuned to subtle cues. They noticed arcs lingering in one spot longer than usual, flickering in sequences that resembled gentle Morse code or forming shapes that evoked familiar objects. A tree, a hill, or even a tiny circle that reminded them of the moon. They whispered to one another, exchanging ideas and observations, often pointing out subtle differences invisible to those who had not watched as closely. These interactions created a gentle network of attention and curiosity, a shared meditation on the patterns above. Even those who had never witnessed the arcs directly felt their presence. Conversations in quiet homes drifted toward the unknown, memories of past sightings mingling with the new, subtle movements in the sky. Parents shared stories with children, telling of lights that had appeared decades ago, sometimes interpreted as spirits or celestial guides. Children, with eyes wide and imagination awake, combined observation with narrative, creating sketches, soft stories, and gentle theories. The arcs had become both a phenomena and a story, a living, unfolding tale, threaded through observation, imagination, and reflection. Some nights, the Ark's behavior seemed to respond to human attention. When a group watched with focused patience, the Arks lingered longer, their movements deliberate and harmonious. When attention wavered, the Arks drifted away, disappearing beyond the horizon without abruptness, leaving only the memory of motion in the minds of watchers. Observers began to realize that their role was not passive. To watch was to participate, to notice was to honor the Arks' presence. In this subtle interaction, observation became a gentle act of communion, a way to engage with the world and the unknown without fear or expectation. Whispers of interpretation began to emerge. Some suggested that the Arks carried messages, not in language, but in rhythm, timing, and gesture. Others proposed that they were markers, guiding attention to places of natural beauty or historical significance. No one claimed certainty. The speculation was soft, tentative, respectful of the mystery. Discussions moved slowly, like the Arks themselves, with pauses to listen, to reflect, and to notice the faintest shifts in movement. Across villages, small acts of documentation blossomed. People drew, wrote, and mapped the Ark's appearances, noting subtle differences in shape, brightness, and path. Children traced Arks in notebooks, adding colors that matched their memories. Silvery, pale gold, faint green, hints of violet. Adults kept journals, often recording personal reflections alongside observations. Some experimented with soft photography, capturing faint streaks of light that hinted at movement, but could never fully reproduce the Ark's delicate grays. Every act of documentation became a ritual of attention, a way to preserve the fleeting, ephemeral presence of the silent visitors. Even local wildlife seemed to acknowledge the Ark's presence. Dogs paused mid-step, ears tilting toward the horizon. Birds hovered briefly before settling again in trees. Cattle lifted heads and nostrils, sensing subtle currents in the night air. Observers noted these responses, not as proof of anything extraordinary, but as part of the gentle, interconnected rhythm of life that the Arks had awakened. The land itself, it seemed, was attuned to the presence above, offering subtle signs that reinforced the experience of observation. As days turned into weeks, observers began to notice faint shifts in emotional tone. Nights spent watching the Arks carried a subtle sense of calm and clarity, as though the act of attention itself was restorative. Parents discovered patience in guiding children through observation. Children learned focus and reverence for subtle beauty, and elders found a renewed sense of wonder in the familiar landscape. The Arks had become not only a visual phenomenon but an emotional one, shaping how people felt, moved, and connected in quiet ways. The Arks also inspired reflections on memory and continuity. Older watchers recalled the 1994 aerial school sightings, recognizing echoes of past experiences in the Arks above. Stories whispered across generations became soft threads linking past and present, creating a sense of continuity and shared witness. Children, listening to these stories, began blending observation with imagination, producing gentle sketches, soft narratives, and quiet theories. The Arks had become both a present phenomena and a bridge through time, connecting memory, imagination, and attention in ways that defied explanation. One particularly calm evening, a trio of Arks hovered over a quiet clearing, moving slowly in a synchronized dance. Observers noted how the Arks paused, almost as if exchanging signals, then separated briefly before A young girl, Anasu, pointed quietly, tracing their paths in the dirt below her feet. Her father watched in silence, sensing the subtle teaching unfolding. The Ark's movements invited careful attention, patience, and reflective thought. "It's like they're speaking," he whispered, but not with words, only with motion. The girl nodded, eyes wide, feeling a quiet thrill in recognizing the Ark's intention. Researchers and amateur astronomers continued to compile data, yet even their most meticulous measurements could not fully explain the Ark's nuances. Times, angles, brightness levels, all were carefully logged. Yet the essence of the phenomenon remained elusive. Photographs captured streaks. Videos showed faint glimmers, but nothing could replicate the Ark's full elegance and presence. Observers realized that the phenomenon existed not only in the sky but in the act of watching itself. Observation, they discovered, was inseparable from experience, and attention became a gentle key to understanding. And so the nights unfolded, with arcs tracing subtle patterns, pauses, and glimmers across the Zimbabwean sky. Each observer, whether alone or in groups, participated in the quiet dialogue, finding in the arc's deliberate movements a form of companionship and reflection. Memory, imagination, attention, and curiosity intertwined, creating a tapestry of experience that was at once personal and shared. Through these silent visitors, watchers learned a gentle lesson. Mystery does not demand comprehension. Presence does not require explanation. Attention, curiosity, and reflection are themselves gifts, ways to connect with the world, with one another, and with the quiet, deliberate rhythms that sometimes appear in the night sky. The auks continued their soft dance above, weaving through time, memory, and attention. Each night, each pause, each gentle movement invited watchers to slow, breathe, and notice. And in this act of watching, the watchers themselves were awakened not to answers, but to wonder, reflection, and the quiet, profound joy of participating in a story that stretched beyond sight, beyond words, and beyond immediate understanding. And as the auks continued their quiet, deliberate journey, whispers of an even deeper story began to stir, hinting at connections yet unseen and truths waiting to be felt. Chapter 7. Encounters Beyond Sight. The nights had settled into a gentle rhythm, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The silver arcs continued their quiet dance across the Zimbabwean sky. But something subtle had shifted. Observers began to notice moments that went beyond simple observation. Instances where the ark's movements felt almost intentional, almost like a dialogue being conducted in silence. There was a sense that the sky was alive, aware of the watchers below, and that each glance upward was part of a delicate conversation that did not require words. In the small village of Rua, Anaisu and her friends had taken to walking along the riverbanks after dinner. Blankets and notebooks tucked under their arms, the evening air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and ripening fruit. As they reached a gentle bend in the river, the auks appeared, gliding slowly over the water's surface. For a few moments, they hung in perfect stillness, reflecting faintly on the ripples below. The children leaned forward, not speaking, only feeling the quiet weight of attention pressing softly against their senses. It was as if the auks had noticed them, paused for them, and were communicating a subtle invitation to see, to feel, and to imagine. Elder observers, too, experienced these quiet interactions. Tendai, who had been sketching arcs for weeks, began to notice subtle gestures in their movements. One night a lone arc hovered above his garden, shifting gently back and forth in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Hasewach's hand trembled slightly over his notebook. He did not attempt to explain. He simply observed, feeling a deep connection to the quiet presence above. That night, sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of arcs weaving through starlight, carrying messages he could not fully understand, yet somehow recognized. The ark's presence began to influence human behavior in unexpected ways. Villagers reported feeling a gentle calm wash over them during evening routines. Parents noticed that their children were more patient, more attentive, their imaginations alive with stories and sketches inspired by the ark's movements. Teachers found that even mundane lessons seemed subtly enriched when they referenced the patterns in the sky, comparing ark's trajectories to rivers, roads, or constellations. Life, once hurried and distracted, slowed in response to the ark's deliberate rhythm, allowing space for reflection, creativity, and quiet observation. One evening, a group of amateur astronomers set up simple telescopes along the ridge of a hill, hoping to measure angles and brightness. As they adjusted their instruments, they noticed arcs pausing and splitting into smaller, delicate threads of light. The watchers exchanged glances, silent acknowledgement passing between them. It was clear that the arcs were not random. Each movement was precise, yet subtle, a language that asked only for attention rather than comprehension. When the astronomers shifted their gaze, the arcs drifted softly toward another part of the sky, as if leading the watchers to observe new patterns, new shapes, new possibilities. Children became increasingly attuned to these subtleties. Tofajua, the quiet boy who had first traced arcs in the dirt, began noticing repetitions in patterns, loops, pauses, spirals, as if the arcs were performing a silent ritual. He whispered observations to his friends, pointing to subtle variations. A flicker here, a hesitation there. They began sketching together, their notebooks forming a tapestry of soft shapes and patterns. Each page, a reflection of attention and imagination. The act of observation became not just a pastime, but a meditation, a gentle practice of seeing, remembering, and feeling. The arcs seemed to respond to focused attention. When observers lingered, the lights drifted slowly, almost shyly, as if encouraging closer scrutiny. When attention waned, the arcs faded gently into the horizon, leaving a memory of motion, light, and intention. These interactions created a quiet bond between human and phenomena, a subtle awareness that connection could exist without explanation. That presence alone carried meaning. Across the countryside, whispers of interpretation spread softly. Some speculated that the arcs were markers, drawing attention to places imbued with memory or natural beauty. Others suggested they were guides, pointing toward reflection, patience, and the quiet rhythms of life. No one claimed certainty, and the humility of these interpretations became part of the ritual of watching. The mystery itself, observed without expectation, held a value greater than explanation. Even wildlife seemed to participate in the quiet communion. Birds paused mid-flight, watching arcs move with gentle curiosity. Dogs rested their heads and gazed at the sky, ears twitching as if in recognition of some unspoken pattern. Cattle lifted heads from grazing, nostrils flaring softly. Observers noted these behaviors, not as evidence of anything extraordinary, but as part of a delicate harmony, a subtle interplay of attention, life, and quiet observation that wove together sky, land, and observer. The arcs also sparked reflection on memory and continuity. Elders shared stories of wandering lights from decades past, tales of spirits, guides, or celestial messages. Children combined observation with imagination, blending legend and reality into sketches, soft stories, and gentle speculation. The arcs had become not only a present phenomenon, but a thread connecting past, present, and imagination, weaving a quiet tapestry of attention across generations. As weeks passed, patterns emerged in ways that suggested subtle intelligence. Certain arcs appeared consistently over landmarks, pausing to drift, splitting, and merging, creating delicate shapes in the sky. Observers began to note these sequences, tracing them in sketches, mapping them in notebooks, and discussing them in hushed conversations. The arc's behavior was neither hurried nor abrupt. It was deliberate, precise, and rhythmic, a silent dance that invited participation rather than demanded attention. Whispers among observers grew more thoughtful. What if these lights were not merely phenomena, but a form of communication? Could patterns of movement convey meaning without words? Were these gentle guides, teaching observation, patience, or a deeper connection to the rhythms of life? Questions like these floated quietly through conversations, never pressed, always suspended, leaving space for reflection and imagination. Anasu, sitting one night in her favorite hill with her notebook, observed an arc that paused over a distant grove. Its glow softened, then pulsed faintly, as if emphasizing a subtle rhythm. She traced the shape in her notebook, feeling a gentle understanding settle over her. She did not fully know what it meant, but she understood the act itself. Watching, noticing, and responding with attention was part of a quiet dialogue that transcended explanation. Observers began noticing another pattern. The arcs, sometimes aligned over clusters of watchers, a family on a veranda, a group of children in the grass, and a lone elder on a hill might all experience arcs, pausing above their location, flickering softly as if acknowledging shared attention. This subtle resonance created a sense of inclusion and connection, as if the arcs recognized the watchers' patience, curiosity, and reverence. The act of observation became ritualized. Families gathered, children sketched, elders recorded, and quiet conversation flowed around the shared experience. Music drifted softly from open windows, melodies inspired by the arc's movements. Photography captured glimpses of shimmer, though none could fully replicate the subtle grace observed by the human eye. Journals, sketches, and whispered reflections formed a collective archive of attention and wonder, preserving not answers, but the beauty of noticing. By the end of the month, the watchers had become participants in a gentle awakening. The arcs were no longer simply lights in the sky. They were companions, guides, and teachers. Hech, Mobament, pause, and shimmer carried meaning that could not be measured, only felt. The nights of Zimbabwe had transformed into a shared space of reflection, patience, and quiet communion, connecting land, sky, and the hearts of those who watched. And yet, even as the watchers grew accustomed to the arcs, the silent visitors retained their mystery. No words, no displays of power, no sudden events disrupted the calm. Their presence was gentle, deliberate, and patient, guiding attention without demanding it. Observers realized that the ark's quiet patience mirrored life itself, teaching the beauty of noticing, the value of curiosity, and the subtle joy of participating in something beyond ordinary understanding. In every village, every field, and every hilltop, watchers discovered a truth that did not need explanation. That presence, attention, and gentle curiosity were themselves profound experiences. The arcs above, delicate and deliberate, invited reflection, meditation, and connection. A story told not in words, but in light, rhythm, and the quiet pulse of awareness. The silent visitors had awakened the watchers' hearts, teaching that mystery could be a companion, observation, a meditation, and attention a bridge to something quietly extraordinary. And as the watchers settled into this new rhythm of quiet understanding, the arcs hinted at deeper patterns, whispering of secrets yet to be glimpsed. Chapter 8. Echoes Across the Sky. The nights in Zimbabwe had settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. With each passing evening, the arcs of silver light traced gentle paths across the sky, weaving between stars and clouds, carrying with them the subtle sense of a story unfolding. Observers no longer approached the phenomenon as a fleeting curiosity. Instead, they treated it as a quiet companion, an invisible presence that invited reflection, patience, and wonder. There was a stillness to the air now, a gentle hush that seemed to follow the arcs, as if the land itself held its breath in recognition. In the small village of Harare's outskirts, families gathered on verandas, blankets tucked around shoulders, eyes lifted toward the horizon. Children, notebooks in hand, whispered softly to one another, sketching the arcs as they moved, noting the subtle variations in color and rhythm. A faint green shimmer appeared one night above a cluster of trees, lingering just long enough for the watchers to feel its quiet significance. "It's like it's pausing to think," murmured Tariro, tilting her head and tracing the ark's trajectory in the dirt. Her friends nodded, understanding without needing explanation, as if the arcs spoke in a language beyond words. Elder observers noticed the ark's subtle responsiveness. Tendai, who had spent countless nights mapping patterns and trajectories, began documenting the moments when the arcs seemed to acknowledge their watchers. An arc would drift slowly, pause, and then flicker gently, almost in rhythm with the observer's attention. At times, multiple arcs aligned, forming shapes in the sky that resembled circles, spirals, or delicate constellations that were not part of the known stars. Each formation felt intentional, deliberate, and rhythmic, a soft dialogue that required only observation and patience to participate in. These patterns began inspiring quiet reflection. Families and children alike realized that the ark's movements mirrored life itself, moments of pause, repetition, variation, and rhythm. Observers found themselves noticing small details in their own environments. The sway of grass in evening breezes, the shimmer of water reflecting moonlight, the soft rustle of leaves in the dark. Each subtle observation became a bridge connecting the arcs above with the world below, weaving together attention, presence, and quiet understanding. Observers began experimenting with gentle forms of communication. A group of teenagers, led by Tafajua, sat beneath a cluster of trees one night, waving soft lead lights upward, moving them in slow arcs to mirror the patterns they had seen. The arcs responded with slight deviations, pausing longer over some gestures, splitting briefly, and then returning to their original course. It was not language, not in the conventional sense, but a shared rhythm, a subtle interplay of intention and attention that created a quiet resonance between human and phenomenon. Across the countryside, whispers of these subtle communications spread. Families exchanged sketches, notes, and observations, noticing similarities in the arcs, pauses, shapes, and glow. Social media discussions were understated, reflective, and patient, emphasizing observation over speculation. The arcs lingered above the hill tonight. One post read, then split into two before returning. "Did anyone else notice?" Another said. "I think they were responding to our watching, but I'm not sure how." It's soft, like a whisper. The sharing of such gentle observations built a collective consciousness, connecting observers across distance and circumstance. Even wildlife seemed attuned to the Ark's presence. Birds halted mid-flight, circling briefly before settling in trees. Dogs rested their heads, ears twitching toward the soft glow above. Cattle lifted heads, nostrils flaring, sensing currents in the night air imperceptible to human senses. Observers marveled at these responses, noting that the Ark's influence extended beyond human attention, weaving through the natural world in ways both subtle and profound. One evening, an Ark hovered for several minutes above a small pond, reflecting faintly on the still surface of the water. A young girl named Emily sat nearby, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. She noticed the reflection shimmer with delicate ripples that seemed to echo the Ark's movement. She traced the pattern with her pencil, feeling a quiet thrill as she realized the Ark's presence was not just visual, but almost tactile, an experience that resonated within her own body and mind. This silent connection, she discovered, was more profound than any photograph, more moving than any story. A gentle affirmation of attention and presence. Researchers, though meticulous, continued to find their instruments insufficient to capture the Ark's essence. Telescopes, cameras, and even video cameras recorded faint streaks of light, yet nothing reproduced the subtlety, the rhythm, and the sense of dialogue that observers experienced firsthand. Measurements of angles, brightness, and duration were collected and logged, but the heart of the phenomenon remained elusive. Observers began to understand that the Ark's true presence existed not in data, but in attention itself, in the quiet act of noticing, reflecting, and responding. Patterns became increasingly intricate. Certain Arks appeared at precise intervals, hovering over landmarks significant to observers, then drifting toward new locations in subtle choreography. Multiple Arks sometimes converged, forming temporary constellations that inspired awe and reflection. These formations were not alarming. Rather, they encouraged patience and contemplation. Observers began tracking sequences in notebooks, comparing sketches and logs, and noticing correlations between the Ark's behaviors and natural rhythms. Such as today's wind patterns and the moon's trajectory. Children's imagination flourished alongside observation. They crafted stories in soft whispers, blending sketches with gentle narratives of Arks as guides, guardians, or messengers. The Ark's deliberate movements became the framework for tales of kindness, curiosity, and patience. Elders, sharing stories of lights seen decades earlier, found their recollections mirrored and enriched by contemporary observations. Past, present, and imagination merged seamlessly, creating a rich tapestry of collective memory and gentle speculation. One particularly still night, a group of Arks hovered over a hilltop, pausing to form a subtle spiral. Observers noticed the motion was not abrupt, but deliberate, rhythmic, almost musical in its pacing. Anisu, sitting with a notebook, felt a quiet exhilaration as she traced the spiral with her pencil. It was as if the Arks were offering a lesson in patience and attention, a demonstration of how small movements could create patterns of profound beauty. The watchers understood, without needing words, that this was a moment to slow, breathe, and be present. As the Arks continued, observers began noticing a gentle emotional resonance. Nights spent watching the Arks brought calm, clarity, and introspection. Families felt connected, children developed patience, and elders rediscovered awe in familiar landscapes. The Ark's presence was not merely visual. It was emotional, shaping thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in subtle ways. Observers began noticing kindness, attention, and care emerging in daily interactions, a reflection of the quiet grace above. The Arks seemed to honor shared attention. Groups that lingered longer, who watched with patience and quiet reverence, experienced Arks pausing and splitting in delicate sequences. This subtle responsiveness suggested a silent acknowledgement, a gentle communication that did not rely on words. Observers began to feel included in something larger than themselves, a quiet network of attention and intention that transcended distance and circumstance. Even as patterns became more evident, the mystery remained. The Arks never revealed purpose or origin. They maintained patience, rhythm, and deliberate subtlety. Observers understood that the arcs were teachers in presence and attention, guiding without commanding, inviting reflection rather than explanation. The nights became rituals of calm, meditation, and quiet curiosity, a shared communion between sky, land, and attentive hearts. And so, the arcs traced their paths across the sky, whispering in light and motion. Observers, young and old, alone and in groups, participated in this silent dialogue, discovering that the act of watching itself carried meaning. The arcs had become more than lights. They were companions, guides, and gentle messengers, teaching attention, patience, and the joy of presence. And as the arcs continued to weave their delicate patterns, hints of a deeper message began to emerge, promising discoveries that reached beyond what anyone had yet seen. Chapter 9. The Silent Visitors. The nights in Zimbabwe had settled into a quiet cadence, a rhythm that was as much felt as it was seen. The silver axe continued their slow, deliberate dance across the sky, moving with a grace that seemed almost conscious. Observers had grown attuned to the subtle shifts, the hesitation of a pause, the delicate ripple of light, the faint change in speed, and they began to sense that the arcs were more than luminous phenomena. They were silent visitors, weaving a gentle, invisible dialogue with those who watched with attention. In the rolling fields outside Rua, families and children gathered beneath the canopy of stars. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of the earth after rainfall, carrying a faint sweetness from blooming flowers. Blankets were spread across the grass, and notebooks rested on laps. Anasu pointed upward, her finger tracing the faint trajectory of a shimmering arc. "It's hovering longer tonight," she whispered, leaning closer to her friends. They nodded in understanding, not speaking, allowing the silence to amplify the quiet connection they felt with the sky. Even adults, those who had once been skeptical, found themselves caught in the arc's subtle azuri. Tendai, now a familiar figure in the observation circles, felt his heartbeat slow as he watched the arcs converge and diverge with effortless precision. The movements were deliberate, but gentle, as if the arcs were teaching a silent lesson in observation and patience. No words were spoken, yet there was a profound sense of recognition that the sky itself was aware, and that their act of noticing mattered. The children noticed patterns that adults sometimes missed. Tafajwa leaned against a tree, sketching the arc's trajectories. He observed how a single light would pause above a distant grove, then split into two, moving in soft spirals before each movement felt deliberate, intentional, yet impossible to fully interpret. When he shared his sketches with his friends, they pointed out subtle nuances. A slight green shimmer here, a flicker there that he had not noticed. In this shared attention, a quiet sense of collaboration formed, a network of understanding built on patience, observation, and imagination. Across villages, quiet conversations began to unfold. Parents whispered to children about memories of lights from decades past, stories of wandering lanterns or spirits, blending with the current arcs into a tapestry of narrative and memory. Children incorporated these stories into sketches, soft narratives, and gentle hypotheses. Each observer, young or old, was part of a quiet community, bound by the act of witnessing something delicate, intentional, and beyond immediate explanation. The arc's subtle intelligence became more evident in how they responded to human attention. When groups lingered, watching with patience and curiosity, the arcs appeared to acknowledge their focus, pausing in midair, splitting into multiple threads, or weaving gentle spirals that drew the watcher's eyes along intricate paths. When attention faltered, the arcs drifted away slowly, fading into the horizon, leaving only the memory of their motion. Observers realized that their own attention was an essential part of the experience, that the arc's presence was not a spectacle, but a quiet invitation to participate in a rhythm of observation and reflection. Night after night, patterns of light seemed to resonate with places rich in memory. An arc would hover briefly over an old schoolhouse, a grove where children once played, or a quiet riverbank where elders had walked decades earlier. It was as if the arcs were aware not only of physical locations, but of the histories, stories, and quiet rhythms embedded in the land. Observers felt a gentle acknowledgement, a whisper of recognition, that their presence and attention mattered. Wildlife, too, seemed to respond to the arcs. Quiet rhythm, birds paused mid-flight, hovering with wings outstretched as if mesmerized. Dogs rested their heads, ears perked, eyes following the silver arcs as they drifted across the horizon. Cattle lifted heads from grazing, nostrils flaring at subtle currents in the air. These reactions, observed quietly by human watchers, became part of the gentle choreography of life that the arcs had awakened. The natural world and human perception seemed intertwined, connected by the silent guidance of light and rhythm above. Observers also discovered that the arcs carried a subtle emotional resonance. Nights spent in their presence inspired calm, patience, and introspection. Children became quieter, more reflective. Parents noticed an ease in conversations, a softening of hurried rhythms. Even the most skeptical adults found themselves drawn into the ark's quiet embrace, appreciating the value of attention, observation, and shared presence. The arcs were not frightening or startling. They were gentle teachers, imparting lessons in perception, awareness, and connection through silent movement. Patterns gradually became more intricate and deliberate. Arcs aligned over clusters of watchers, pausing to form spirals, circles, or sequences that resembled constellations not found in the night sky. These formations were subtle, requiring patience to notice, yet each carried the unmistakable sense of intention. Observers began recording sequences in notebooks, sketching movements, and comparing observations across evenings. What emerged was not a clear message, but a quiet rhythm, a pattern of attention that connected watchers across space and time. Children, in particular, felt a sense of participation that transcended mere observation. Anasu and her friends began constructing gentle narratives around the arcs, imagining them as guides or messengers carrying whispers across the sky. The sketches evolved into small storybooks, blending memory, imagination, and observation into tales of soft adventure, curiosity, and reflection. Each story captured the ark's movements, the stillness of the night, and the subtle interplay between light, attention, and understanding. Even researchers found themselves humbled by the ark's elusive elegance. Telescopes, cameras, and recording devices captured streaks and flashes, yet none could replicate the rhythm, nuance, or presence felt by human observers. Measurements of brightness, speed, and trajectory were collected, but the true essence of the arcs remained intangible, existing only in the act of attentive watching. The phenomenon could not be contained in data. It was alive in experience, breathing quietly in the minds and hearts of those who participated. And as the nights unfolded, observers realized the ark's movements had grown almost musical, as if conducting a silent symphony of light. Spirals and loops, pauses and flickers, all created a choreography that was calming, mesmerizing, and immersive. Observers felt themselves carried along by this rhythm, their senses attuned not just to sight, but to the subtle flow of air, scent, and quiet movement in the world around them. The arcs taught them that presence was more important than understanding, attention more profound than certainty. In the soft, cool air of a late evening, Anasu noticed an arc split into two threads, weaving around each other before merging again. She whispered to her friends, "They're dancing." The others nodded, sharing in the quiet wonder. This simple act of noticing became a ritual, repeated night after night, forming a gentle bridge between human perception and the ark's subtle intelligence. And yet, even with patterns emerging, the arcs remained enigmatically deliberate. They never revealed origin, intent, or purpose. They were silent, gentle, and patient, teaching watchers that mystery could coexist with calm, that presence could be profound without explanation. The arcs had become companions, guides, and mentors, inviting reflection, patience, and connection in ways that transcended sight and words. Watchers, in turn, became part of the ark's unfolding story. By observing, sketching, whispering, and reflecting, they participated in a quiet meditation that wove together land, sky, imagination, and attention. Each night, the arcs moved with gentle intent, responding to focus, rewarding patience, and teaching subtlety. Observers discovered that to watch was to connect, to notice was to participate, and to feel was to understand in a way that words could never capture. In this quiet communion, the arcs had transformed from mere lights into teachers of awareness. They guided attention without command, shared presence without interruption, and whispered lessons in the gentle art of noticing. Observers understood that the phenomenon existed not to be conquered, explained, or dissected, but to be experienced, a quiet, immersive, and hypnotic story written in light, rhythm, and the calm pulse of the night. The silver arcs continued to glide, split, merge, and shimmer across the Zimbabwean sky. Wary, ever-present, yet elusive, deliberate, yet unassuming. Observers, young and old, alone and in groups, participated in their quiet dance, discovering the depth of attention, reflection, and wonder that could emerge in the simple act of looking, waiting, and breathing with the world. And as the arcs traced their silent paths, an even subtler rhythm began to emerge, hinting at messages that were no longer just in movement, but in presence itself. Chapter 10. Patterns in the silence. The nights had grown longer, yet the darkness no longer felt empty. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hills, the sky began its quiet ritual of illumination. The silver arcs appeared, not as sudden intrusions, but as gentle awakenings. Their movements had become more deliberate, more intricate, and those who watched had learned to anticipate the delicate choreography. Observers, young and old alike, felt a deepening bond with the phenomenon, a sense that these arcs were less objects to study and more companions to honor with attention. Anasu and her friends often lingered on the edge of the village, sitting beneath the gentle sway of acacia trees. They spoke softly, sharing observations and sketches, but mostly they simply watched. The arcs drifted above the hills, pausing in soft spirals, splitting into delicate threads, then merging in luminous harmony. In these moments, the children felt as if the sky itself had a heartbeat, synchronized with their own quiet pulses. There was no fear, no rush, only the calm of patient observation and the joy of being part of something subtly alive. The patterns of movement began to suggest a kind of rhythm, a silent song that could be felt rather than heard. Observers noticed that arcs often repeated sequences at handful posts, a slow spin, a small flicker, then a longer hover before drifting onward. It was as if the arcs were teaching lessons in patience, timing, and attention. Those who watched closely began to mimic the arc's rhythm in subtle ways, shearing softly, tracing their own arcs in the dirt, or moving slowly across the grass to mirror the arc's motion. This interaction was unspoken yet profoundly connective, a quiet dance of attention and acknowledgement. Even the most skeptical villagers could not deny the arc's subtle intelligence. Tendai, who had spent years documenting movements with telescopes and cameras, began keeping detailed sketches of sequences he had not thought possible to replicate. The arc's behavior was too precise, too responsive, and yet too gentle to be random. Sometimes a single arc would pause directly above a watcher, flickering in a way that felt like recognition. Other times, multiple arcs would converge, weaving soft, luminous threads that created intricate patterns across the horizon. The watchers began to sense that they were part of an unfolding dialogue, one that required patience and quiet attention more than explanation. In the fields beyond the village, wildlife responded in subtle, mesmerizing ways. Birds hovered, wings spread, following the arc's paths with slow, deliberate movements. Dogs lifted heads from the grass, ears flicking as if attuned to currents invisible to human eyes. Even the cattle seemed to sense something beyond themselves, pausing to gaze upward, noses lifted to inhale the night air. Observers noted that the arc's influence was not confined to human perception. It had a quiet effect that resonated through the natural world, creating a shared rhythm of awareness that encompassed the land, sky, and its inhabitants. Children began noticing nuances in the arc's behavior that adults often overlooked. Tufajua leaned on a low branch, sketching movements in his notebook, tracing spirals, loops, and pauses. He whispered to his friends about subtle flickers moments, where arcs seemed to split or shimmer more brightly in response to attention. The group experimented with quiet gestures, waving soft LED lights, and found that the arcs often altered their paths slightly, pausing longer over areas where attention was concentrated. It was never abrupt, never intrusive. It was an invitation to participate in observation, a gentle reminder that attention itself was a bridge between the watchers and the silent visitors above. Across villages, soft whispers of interpretation spread. Some suggested that the arcs were guides, subtly highlighting landmarks, moments of memory, or natural beauty. Others imagined them as storytellers, drawing lines in the sky to spark reflection and imagination. No one claimed certainty, and that uncertainty became part of the wonder. The arcs asked for patience, and in return offered a quiet intimacy that words could never fully convey. Observers began to understand that mystery, when approached with calm and curiosity, could become a companion rather than a question to solve. Patterns grew increasingly complex. Observers began noting arcs pausing above groves, river bends, or familiar hills before spiraling outward in delicate sequences. Multiple arcs would align, weaving subtle constellations not found in the night sky. Sometimes the arcs moved in sync, creating mirrored patterns over fields separated by miles. The watchers realized that their collective attention, shared silently across distance, was part of the arc's unfolding choreography. This realization brought a quiet thrill, a recognition that they were participants in something vast, subtle, and profoundly alive. The arc's influence extended into the emotional realm. Nights spent observing their rhythm brought a sense of calm, introspection, and clarity. Children became more patient and focused, adults more reflective, and entire communities began to embrace slow, mindful routines. The arc's quiet presence seemed to encourage kindness, attentiveness, and shared curiosity. It was as if the sky itself reminded them of the beauty of noticing, the power of being present, and the gentle joy of participating in a moment larger than oneself. Stories and sketches began to flourish. Children created notebooks filled with arc's movements, imagining them as guides, messengers, or silent companions. Elders shared memories of lights they had glimpsed decades before, connecting past experiences to the present. In these quiet exchanges, imagination and observation merged, weaving a collective understanding that was both playful and contemplative. The arcs had become a catalyst for storytelling, creativity, and quiet reflection. One particularly serene night, a group of arcs hovered above a ridge, pausing to form subtle, overlapping spirals. Observers sat in silence, tracing the movements with their eyes and fingers. Anasu noted the rhythm, whispering to Tafajwa, "They're teaching us to notice the spaces in between, not just the lines." Her friend nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate in the quiet of the night. Each pause, each flicker, each soft drift of light carried meaning that could not be quantified, only experienced. The arc's silent choreography continued to inspire rituals of attention. Families and children lingered longer under the open sky, sketchbooks in hand, voices hushed to preserve the calm. Observers noticed small acts of synchronicity, a gentle nod, a shared breath, a soft smile that mirrored the arc's movements. These subtle correspondences became a language of participation, a quiet acknowledgement that observation itself was a form of communion. Even researchers found themselves humbled. Instruments and cameras could capture streaks of light but could not replicate the nuance, rhythm, or subtlety perceived by human senses. The arc's essence existed in experience, in attention, and in shared observation. The phenomenon was not a spectacle to be explained or captured. It was a presence to be felt, a lesson in quiet awareness and the beauty of noticing. And so, night after night, the arcs wove their patterns, teaching without words, inviting without command. Observers discovered that mystery could be gentle, presence could be profound, and attention could become a bridge connecting hearts, minds, and the sky above. In the silence between movements, in the spaces between light and shadow, the watchers found a quiet truth. That the act of seeing, waiting, and reflecting was itself a profound journey. The silver arcs glimmered softly, dancing, splitting, merging, and drifting across the Zimbabwean sky. Observers, alone or together, had become participants in this slow, deliberate symphony. Each evening carried lessons in patience, presence, and gentle connection. And as the arcs traced their quiet paths, the watchers understood that some mysteries are not solved, but lived slowly, attentively, and with an open heart. And as the arcs whispered across the horizon, hints of a more deliberate message began to unfold, beckoning the watchers toward revelations yet unseen. Chapter 11. Whispers of meaning. The nights had settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Each evening, as the sun faded behind distant hills, the sky seemed to breathe in anticipation. The silver arcs had grown more deliberate in their movements, tracing patterns that were intricate yet gentle, like brushstrokes across a midnight canvas. Observers had learned to watch with patience, letting their eyes follow the arc's slow spirals, their soft flickers and subtle pauses, and in doing so, they began to sense something deeper, something unspoken, waiting to be understood. Anasu sat on the edge of a small hill, notebook open, pencil hovering above the page. Her eyes traced the arcs as they moved in unison over the fields below, the slow arcs splitting into twin threads, circling one another, and then converging in a gentle embrace. The sight evoked a strange calm in her chest, a quiet thrill that made her feel part of something vast, something larger than the familiar rhythms of her daily life. She noticed the soft shifts in light, a faint green shimmer here, a brief pause there, and began to suspect that each movement carried intention. A subtle whisper meant for those who truly noticed. Across the village, families gathered in small clusters, blankets tucked around shoulders, sketchbooks balanced on laps. The children whispered softly, comparing observations, sharing sketches, and pointing out tiny variations in the arc's tradition. Adults, too, found themselves drawn into the experience, speaking in hushed tones about what they saw, what they felt, and what it might mean. No one claimed certainty. The arcs had never offered explanations. Yet there was an unmistakable sense of meaning in the careful, deliberate patterns, a resonance that seemed to bridge perception, memory, and imagination. Observers began experimenting with gentle forms of interaction. They moved slowly through the grass, tracing arcs with LED lights, or raising their hands to mirror the arcs' slow spirals. The arcs responded subtly, pausing longer above gestures, splitting into twin threads, or shifting slightly in trajectory. The interactions were never sudden or startling. They were quiet acknowledgments, almost conversational in their gentleness. Children whispered excitedly about feeling seen or understood without words, and adults felt a quiet sense of awe that could not be fully expressed. Some nights, the arcs lingered longer than usual above certain landmarks. The old schoolhouse, a grove of trees, a small river bend where reeds whispered in the wind. Observers noticed that these pauses often coincided with moments of reflection. A child sketching thoughtfully, a parent silently tracing the arc's motion, a small group sitting in shared silence. The arcs seemed attuned not only to physical spaces, but to the intentions and attention of those watching, acknowledging moments of presence with deliberate historès. Stories and memories began to weave together. Elder villagers recounted tales of lights seen decades ago, lanterns hovering in fields, strange orbs reflecting off water, or sudden glimmers in the night. Children incorporated these recollections into their sketches and quiet narratives, blending observation with imagination. The arcs, though elusive, became part of an ongoing story, a tapestry of memory, attention, and gentle mystery. Each observer contributed, and each contribution deepened the shared sense of connection. The arc's subtle intelligence became increasingly apparent. Groups who watched attentively often noticed arcs pausing in synchrony, forming soft geometric shapes across the sky, or gently mirroring gestures from below. Observers realized that their own focus influenced the arc's behavior, that attention itself was a medium for interaction. This realization brought a quiet thrill. The arcs were not distant or indifferent. They were participants in a shared rhythm, inviting reflection, patience, and gentle curiosity. Emotional resonance deepened with each evening. Nights spent observing the arcs instilled calm, introspection, and a subtle joy. Children became quieter, more attentive, noticing small details in the natural world. The sway of grasses, the ripple of water, the shimmer of dew. Adults felt a softness in their routines, a reminder to slow down, breathe, and notice. The arc's presence seemed to extend beyond sight, touching perception, feeling, and awareness itself. Observers felt a quiet intimacy with the night, a gentle affirmation that mystery could be comforting, that attention could be rewarding, and that presence was a form of participation in something larger than themselves. Patterns grew ever more intricate. Single arcs split into multiple threads, weaving delicate spirals and concentric circles that hovered for moments long enough to be memorized, sketched, and whispered about. Sometimes, arcs aligned above multiple observers, creating mirrored formations across distant hills. The watchers began to see subtle correspondences, shared rhythms that suggested a silent dialogue between arcs and attention. These sequences were not messengers in words, but whispers in motion, rhythms that required patience and mindfulness to perceive. Children's creativity flourished alongside observation. Anasu and her friends constructed quiet stories around the ark's movements, imagining them as guides, messengers, or gentle companions. Sketchbooks became storybooks, blending visual patterns with soft narratives about patience, observation, and reflection. Elders contributed tales of similar lights from long ago, bridging decades of memory and creating a continuum between past and present. Together, these stories fostered a community of gentle wonder, a shared space where imagination and attentive observation coexisted. One particularly serene night, a group of arks paused above a hilltop, forming delicate spirals that overlapped like lace in the sky. Observers sat in silent awe, eyes tracing the ark's movements, pencil tips hovering above paper. And Anasu whispered, "They're teaching us to notice the pauses, not just the motion." Tafajwa nodded, heart quiet yet full, sensing the truth in her words. The arks had become teachers, not in the traditional sense, but guides in presence, attention, and quiet awareness. Observers discovered subtle rituals forming naturally. Families lingered under the open sky, sketchbooks in hand, sharing soft nods and quiet smiles as they traced the ark's movements. A.H. Hester. Each breath, each attentive glance, became a form of acknowledgement, a bridge between watcher and phenomenon. In this silent communion, the ark's true essence became clear. They existed not to be captured, explained, or controlled, but to be experienced, noticed, and cherished. Even researchers felt humbled. Instruments could record streaks of light, variations in brightness, and trajectory data, but none could replicate the subtlety, rhythm, or emotional resonance perceived by human observers. The ark's essence existed in lived experience, in the attentive act of observation, and in the shared understanding that emerged across generations. The phenomenon was less about spectacle and more about connection, an invitation to inhabit the world with care, presence, and wonder. The arks glimmered softly, tracing slow, deliberate paths across the Zimbabwean sky. They danced, split, merged, and hovered, inviting watchers into a quiet rhythm that transcended explanation. Those who participated discovered that mystery could coexist with calm, that uncertainty could be beautiful, and that attention itself carried profound meaning. In the gentle interplay of light, movement, and awareness, observers found a sense of belonging, a shared story written not in words, but in subtle arcs of silver across the night. And as the arcs traced their quiet choreography, the watchers understood that the true gift was not in answers or revelations, but in the act of being present, in seeing, noticing, and breathing with the rhythms of a sky alive with subtle whispers. And as the arcs lingered above, subtle signs began to hint at something deeper, a revelation that would weave together the past, the present, and the threads of human attention. Chapter 12. Whispers of Return. The final nights of observation had arrived, and the air carried a quiet anticipation, a soft electricity that seemed almost imperceptible, but deeply present. The silver arcs glimmered above the hills and fields, moving with a deliberate grace that had become familiar yet never predictable. Those who had watched for weeks noticed that the arcs' subtle choreography had evolved, their motions more intricate, poses longer and flickers more intentional. It was as if the sky itself held a conversation that was only audible to those who listened with patience and attention. Anasu leaned back against the rough bark of a tree, notebook resting across her lap, pencil poised but still. Her eyes traced the ark's patterns, and for the first time, she felt the sense of culmination. Not an ending, but a soft, profound arrival. The arcs moved in gentle spirals over familiar landmarks. The old schoolhouse, the grove of flowering acacias, the small river where reeds whispered with the wind. Observers had begun to sense that the arcs were aware of memory itself, pausing above places heavy with recollection, almost acknowledging the histories embedded in the land and in their own minds. Across the fields, families and children gathered quietly, blankets and notebooks spread under the starlit sky. Each observer had come to understand that silence was part of the ritual. That noise could break the delicate connection they felt with the arcs. Even words were spoken sparingly, as if each breath could disturb the subtle communication unfolding above. The arcs moved not as objects, but as living presences, responsive to attention, thoughtful in their pauses and deliberate in their gestures. Tafajwa, sitting a short distance from Anasu, traced an arc in the air with his finger, mirroring a faint silver line above. The arc above lingered slightly longer, pausing with an almost imperceptible tilt, as if acknowledging his gesture. The children whispered excitedly to one another, marveling at the quiet dialogue they were beginning to perceive in exchange not of words, but of attention, presence, and gentle understanding. Observers had become participants in a subtle choreography, guided by the arc's intricate, luminous patterns. The nights brought more than observation. They brought reflection. Adults spoke softly of memories stirred, of moments from childhood revisited, and of stories once forgotten. Elder villagers shared recollections of lights seen decades earlier, weaving the past into the present, bridging generations through memory and shared attention. The arc seemed to embrace this history, pausing briefly above familiar sights, forming soft patterns that mirrored the ebb and flow of recollection. Every movement of silver light became a reminder that perception and memory were intertwined, and that being present was a form of honoring both. Even the natural world seemed attuned to these gentle visitors. Birds hovered mid-flight, wings extended, following the arc's motion with calm precision. Dogs lifted heads, ears, flicking eyes focused on subtle currents, invisible to humans. Katalepu said grazing ceased, and the wind carried a soft murmur of shifting reeds and leaves. The ark's presence had transformed the landscape itself into a quiet symphony, orchestrating a delicate interplay between sky, land, and those who watched attentively. The ark's subtle intelligence became more apparent as sequences repeated with increasing regularity. Observers began to see patterns, not as messages to decode, but as invitations to mindfulness. Pauses, spirals, and soft flickers invited reflection, patience, and quiet participation. A gentle rhythm emerged, a cadence that linked watchers across space and time, connecting minds, memories, and hearts in a shared experience of observation and presence. Children's sketches and quiet narratives had flourished. They wove stories of gentle guides, messengers, and companions that mirrored the ark's subtle choreography. These narratives were neither literal nor fanciful, but existed in the delicate space between observation and imagination. Adults contributed recollections, linking past sightings to the present phenomenon, creating a tapestry of quiet stories that celebrated memory, attention, and the calm joy of witnessing something larger than oneself. On one particularly serene night, a series of arcs hovered above a distant grove, forming concentric spirals that intersected softly, like threads of silver lace against the velvet sky. Observers sat in hushed awe, tracing each movement with eyes, fingers, and gentle whispers. Anasu turned to Tafajwa and murmured, "It's like they are weaving our attention into the night." He nodded, understanding the profound simplicity of her words. The arcs had become guides, not in a commanding way, but as quiet companions, teaching that the act of noticing was itself a form of participation in a living, breathing rhythm. The ark's influence extended beyond observation. Nights spent in their presence fostered calm, reflection, and subtle connection. Children became attuned to the smallest movements, the quietest sounds, the gentlest rhythms of their surroundings. Adults discovered a slow attentiveness that softened daily anxieties, turning routine into reflection, hurried breaths into awareness, and fleeting moments into memories. The arcs offered no spectacle, only the gift of presence and the gentle art of noticing the world in a new light. As the nights continued, observers noticed arcs pausing above key points, subtly aligning in ways that hinted at a deliberate design. There was no urgency, no drama, only the quiet unfolding of form, rhythm, and attention. These alignments were not messages in words, but invitations to contemplation. The arcs encouraged watchers to reflect on the interwoven patterns of life, memory, and perception, illustrating that awareness itself could be a bridge between observer and world. Families and communities adapted naturally to this rhythm. Evening gatherings became quiet rituals of attention. Blankets on grass, sketchbooks at hand, whispers exchanged in shared wonder. Each movement of the arcs was mirrored by attentive gestures, breaths held in silent communion, and eyes tracing the slow curves and pauses of light. Participants understood that this was not a phenomenon to be captured or explained, but a shared experience to be lived, appreciated, and remembered. Even researchers felt humbled by the ark's subtlety. Cameras could record light, telescopes could measure trajectory, but no instrument could capture the nuance, the rhythm, or the emotional resonance of observation. The phenomenon existed not in data, but in experience, in presence, attention, and shared understanding. Observers learned that some mysteries were meant to be embraced rather than solved, and that participation in the unfolding story required patience, mindfulness, and quiet openness. The final nights brought a sense of culmination, yet not of endings. The arcs moved with soft, deliberate grace, spiraling, splitting, merging, and glimmering as if performing a delicate dance for those who remained attentive. Observers realized that the ark's gift was not revelation, but communion. The skies taught that mystery could coexist with calm, that attention could be profound, and that presence could weave together generations, memories, and quiet wonder. As the last arcs lingered above the hills, soft silver threads tracing gentle spirals in the dark, watchers felt a deep sense of connection. The arcs had guided them through weeks of observation, reflection, and imagination, leaving behind subtle impressions in hearts, minds, and memories. The sky had become a mirror for awareness, patience, and shared curiosity. The phenomena had shown that silence, presence, and attention were themselves a kind of understanding, one that transcended explanation, language, and certainty. And as the night stretched into its final hours, the arcs drifted slowly toward the horizon, leaving observers with a soft, lingering glow in the chest, a quiet hum in the mind, and the gentle truth that some mysteries are never solved, but gently unfolded. In the act of noticing, reflecting, and being present, the watchers had learned that the world itself could whisper, that light could guide, and that wonder could exist in patience, calm, and quiet connection. The Zimbabwean sky held its silver secrets close, a canvas of rhythm, intention, and gentle whispers. Observers, having participated fully in the silent dance, understood that the return sightings were not a spectacle but a journey, a slow, hypnotic exploration of presence, attention, and the quiet magic of noticing the world as it moved around them, alive with rhythm and possibility. And as the final arcs drifted beyond the horizon, their whispers lingered in memory, a gentle reminder that some mysteries never leave, and some stories continue quietly within those who remember. Echoes in the sky as the nights settled into their quiet rhythm. The arcs had drifted beyond the horizon, leaving only traces of silver light in memory and imagination. The watchers, young and old, returned slowly to their homes, carrying with them a soft awareness that the world is larger than what eyes alone can see. The sky had whispered lessons in patience, attention, and gentle wonder. Lessons that would linger long after the arcs had gone. In the days that followed, the memories of movement, light, and delicate rhythm remained vivid. Observers found themselves noticing small things they had once overlooked. The way the wind kissed the grass, the slow curl of smoke rising from a distant fire, the shimmer of dew in the morning sun. Each of these simple moments became part of the quiet dialogue that the arcs had begun, a reminder that awareness itself can be a bridge to magic and meaning. The story of the Zimbabwe UFO Return Sightings had no dramatic finale, no sudden revelations. Instead, it left a soft imprint, a gentle echo in hearts and minds. It taught that mystery need not be solved to be beautiful, that patience is a form of understanding, and that connection with the world, with memory, and with each other can be cultivated in quiet observation. And so as the last light of evening faded and the first stars appeared, a gentle truth remained. The arcs may have returned to the unknown, but the whispers they left behind, the soft lessons in noticing patience and wonder, would never disappear. They existed in the minds of those who watched, in the sketches carefully kept, in the quiet reflections shared between friends, families, and neighbors. The sky holds its secrets close, but for those who pause, breathe, and look with gentle attention, it continues to speak, not in words, but in rhythm, presence, and the quiet beauty of something larger than ourselves. And in that silence, in that gentle awareness, the watchers learned one final truth. Wonder is not fleeting, and some mysteries are meant to stay with us, softly, like a lullaby whispered across the stars.